Part 16. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn. I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 166. Shen Yu raised her eyes and said, "Okay." She stood up, looked at Xie Tingzhou, put her hands on her waist, and slowly untied her belt. Her movements were as slow as seduction. Xie Tingzhou stared at her closely, his breathing gradually becoming rapid. His mouth went dry under her unexplained seduction, and he wanted to shout to stop, but he couldn't open his mouth, so he could only swallow hard. He felt like a hungry ghost in lust, biting the soft flesh inside his lips. She just untied her belt and he already raised his head. Shen Yu had already pulled open the belt, and with a slight movement of her fingers, the belt fell to the ground. Next came the outer robe, and then his fingers landed on the inner garment. Not only did she not move, she stared directly at Xie Tingzhou, but her hands began to shake. She now fully understands what it means to shoot oneself in the foot. Xie Tingzhou's eyes looked like Kang had seen his prey at this moment. "Why don't you take off your clothes? Aren't you taking a bath?" Shen Yu said nothing, the dilemma written on her face. Xie Tingzhou walked over, picked up the belt on the ground, put it around her waist, pulled the two ends of the belt and pulled it away suddenly. Shen Yu was pushed against him by the considerable force. Shen Yu breathed a sigh of relief when he called stop. She originally wanted to tease him, but she was really panicked just now. She didn't know how she would end up if he didn't call stop. I win. Shen Yu raised her head and looked at him. Xie Tingzhou lowered his eyes and looked at each other. "I can always lose to you." Shen Yu was slightly startled, her heart softened, and she said, "You don't have to give in to me every time." Of course. Xie Tingzhou looked at her. "If you seduced me today, I will always get it back in the future." He made a pun, and Shen Yu realized that the area close to her lower abdomen was so hot. "Don't move blindly," Xie Tingzhou said before she retreated. "Do you want me to die?" "Shen Yu, am I that cruel? I've been gone for more than a month." "Isn't that cruel enough?" Xie Tingzhou asked. Shen Yu looked up at him, her face dazzled by how hot he was. Don't you go take a shower?" Xie Tingzhou asked. "You want me to go out like this? Isn't the robe quite big?" Shen Yu blushed and looked away. Xie Tingzhou laughed. "Are you underestimating me, Shen Yu?" Speaking of this, she felt that any words she said would be like playing a hooligan. In a dilemma, he pushed Xie Tingzhou away, picked up the outer robe on the ground and walked around to the inner room. Xie Tingzhou looked at the figure hurriedly dressing behind the screen and smiled a little evilly. The place where Shen Zhong'an's bones were buried was on a hilltop with good feng shui. In front of the grave was a weeping willow tree that had grown for decades. "Someone has been here before." Shen Yu got closer. She saw the paper money burned in front of the grave. Xie Tingzhou was carrying a bamboo basket filled with incense, candles, paper money, and a pot of ruoxiacon that Shen Zhong'an loved to drink. Shen Yu stepped forward and saw a pot of the same wine in front of the grave, with some mud stains on the pot. It rained last night, and there were some willow leaves on the tombstone. Shen Yu knelt down in front of Shen Zhong'an's tomb and gently stroked the willow leaves off. She said softly, "Dad, I'm here to see you. No matter how long it has been since the death of a loved one, looking at that small tomb still makes people feel sad." Xie Tingzhou silently arranged the sacrificial supplies, lit the incense candles, then lifted up his robe and knelt down. Shen Yu was startled and just about to speak. Xie Tingzhou held her hand. Xie Tingzhou looked at Shen Zhong'an's tombstone and said, "I have heard about General Shen for a long time, but have never met him. Today, Tingzhou kneels down here and asks General Shen to give Au to me. I will love her and cherish her forever." Burden. Shen Yu choked and said, "I have already promised him. If you agree, just let the wicker move." A breeze blew over the hills, and the willow branches swayed in the wind and touched the graves. Shen Yu burst into tears. "Then I'll take it as your promise." She poured 3 glasses of wine, one by one, and poured them on the grave. Xieting stood in the distance and watched her sitting in front of the grave and talking a lot. Finally, Shen Yu stood up and patted her clothes. "Dad, I'm leaving. When I finish this matter, I will wake up and take you to Blackbird Mountain to find your mother so that you can reunite." Xieting held her hand and asked, "What did you mutter?" "I'm filing a complaint," Shen Yu said. "I said you always bully me." Xieting raised his eyebrows, looked at her reddish nose, let go of her and squatted down in front of her. "Come up." "What?" Shen Yu looked at him. Xieting kept his posture and turned around. "I'll make a show in front of my father-in-law, please ask the imperial concubine to do it." Shen Yu laughed, threw herself on his back, and said, "That's right. It has been the beginning of summer a few days ago, and the weather is starting to get warmer." Shen Yu lay on his back, resting her chin on the crook of his neck, and whispered, "I'll be on duty tomorrow." "Don't talk about this." Xieting didn't want mundane things to disturb the warmth of the moment. "What do you want to say?" Xieting carried her down the mountain step by step. After thinking for a while, he said, "Don't wear the strip of cloth that binds your chest all the time." Shen Yu said warily, "What do you mean?" "Not good for health." Shen Yu was silent for a long time. "Do you dislike me?" Xieting stopped and looked sideways at her. "Don't accuse me unjustly in front of my father-in-law before we come down from the mountain." "And you? Yesterday your inner clothes were loose." Xieting interrupted her. "I saw a rash on your chest. The weather is hot and the layers of cloth are not breathable, so it is easy to get a rash." After that, he asked again, "Where did you think you were?" Shen Yu lay on his shoulder and whispered, "I thought you thought I was too young." Xieting smiled, "Not small." "How do you know?" Xieting smiled without saying a word and pushed her up. 11 Feng, who was accompanying him, did not dare to step forward when he saw the situation, and the dignified close guard became a distant guard. It was just noon when we returned to the palace. As soon as I entered the house, I heard that someone had come to the house, looking for Shiger. The side hall is a hallway. Shen Yan has been waiting here for a long time. When she saw Shen Yu coming in, she put down the teacup and stood up. She opened her mouth and heard the sound of aja stuck in her throat. Shen Yu walked to the front seat and sat down. "If you have anything to do, just tell me." Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 167. The two of them had already broken up with each other, and Shen Yan came to visit her. Naturally, it was impossible to catch up with her. Shen Yan sat back slowly. "I'm going to take my mother out of the capital." Shen Yu was surprised in her heart, but she didn't show it on her face. Shen Yan continued, "Don't think that I'm thinking of any conspiracy, I just want to survive." She said sarcastically, "Master, she is flying through the sky. The higher you fly, the faster you fall. If you do this, sooner or later everyone in the Shen family will be caught up. What else can I do if I don't run?" "The Shen family," Shen Yu asked, "besides me, is there anyone else in the Shen family?" Shen Yan said, "Whether you admit it or not, my mother is the wife of my father, the matchmaker, and I am the legitimate daughter." "Then you go down to hell to see if he recognizes Dad." These words were harsh, and Shen Yan stood up angrily. "Don't go too far." Shen Yu sneered, "You came to me today, could it be that you came to say goodbye, or were you just asking for trouble?" "I want to sell Shen's house," Shen Yan said. Shen Yu's eyes narrowed. "You must already know why I came to you. You are reluctant to let Shen house fall into the hands of others, and you can afford this price." Shen Yu did not answer the question, but asked, "Have you gone to visit Dad's grave?" She saw the Ruoxiakun pot in front of the grave and guessed it was Shen Yan. Shen Yan's eyes moved and she looked away. you won't even bother me when I go to visit my grave, Lord Shi. I want the Shen mansion, please give me a price, Shen Yu said. Shen Yan didn't expect her to be so happy, so she said, 30,000 taels, this price is just a drop in the bucket to you. The cow hair is not given randomly. Shen Yan was anxious, if we sell it on the market, Shen's house will sell for 40,000 taels. Shen Yu pressed her elbow on the armrest and leaned forward, you also said that the market price is 40,000 taels. Don't forget that I have a share of Shen's house. I won't give you 20,000 taels or even 1 tael of silver. If you dare to sell it to others, you can give it a try, I can do anything. Shen Yan felt that her aura was overwhelming, and she gritted her teeth and remained silent for a long time, her fingernails digging into her palms. Tomorrow she gritted her teeth and said, bring money tomorrow and hand over the money in one hand and the house deed in the other. I will send someone to your door tomorrow. You'd better not play any tricks, Shen Yu said. Now that Shen Yu is an official in the court, if she is exposed, both she and her mother will be implicated. Now she can only run as far as she can. Shen Yan snorted and left in a hurry. She tripped over the threshold when she went out. After she stood firm, she raised her eyes and saw Prince Balin standing in the courtyard. Immortals are like jade, I am afraid this is the scene in front of me. Hearing the sound, Xieting Zhou turned his head and looked lightly. His eyes did not stop at Shen Yan, but fell on Shen Yu who was behind her and became softer. He asked gently, are you done talking? Yes. Shen Yu walked towards Xieting Zhou, what's wrong? Waiting for you to eat. Xieting Zhou took her hand. Shen Yan's fingertips trembled slightly, and the gaze she looked at Shen Yu's back almost pierced Shen Yu. Why? How could she, Shen Yu, be so virtuous and capable? Why do her father, brother, Zhonglianzi, and the crown prince Balin in front of her all like and care for her? She tried to step Shen Yu into the bottom, but she appeared in front of her in another more aggressive posture. She couldn't fight, this was the answer she got after a hard time. Shen Yan almost ran away. She staggered to the door, but suddenly stopped. Shen Yan held the door frame and turned back, Your Highness. Xieting Zhou looked sideways but did not respond. The smile on Shen Yan's face was malicious, I'm afraid there's something that Your Highness the Crown Prince doesn't know yet. My sister's first love affair was with Mr. Jiang from the Ministry of Revenue. She told me that Mr. Jiang's jade trees are beautiful when the wind blows. Admired. Shen Yu wanted to tear her mouth apart, but as soon as she took a step forward, Xieting Zhou hugged her. Then what should we do? Xieting Zhou raised his eyelids. A faint smile appeared on the corner of his lips, and he said leisurely, she fascinated me so much. Don't say that she is just in love. Even if she has been married, I will snatch her away. Shen Yan was stunned and stood blankly at the door, you. Xieting Zhou hugged Shen Yu and turned around calmly, see you off. On the way back to Qingpiju, Xieting Zhou walked faster and faster, and finally let go of Shen Yu and strode forward. Shen Yu followed closely behind him, wondering what happened to him. When she was almost at the door of Qingpu residence, she couldn't help but ask. What's wrong with you? What's wrong? Xieting Zhou turned around suddenly. Shen Yu didn't react quickly enough and almost hit him. Xieting Zhou narrowed his eyes, are you newly in love? No, no, Shen Yu quickly denied. She thought she didn't care what he said just now, but she didn't expect that there was still this problem waiting for her. She should have known that whenever Zhonglianzi was mentioned, his reaction would be greater than anything else, and Shen Yu would begin to suspect that the person he really liked was actually Zhonglianzi, and the reason why he was with her was because he didn't want Zhonglianzi to marry. Xieting Zhou pressed forward, is he a tree in the wind? Shen Yu shook her head, no, you are the most talented and beautiful. Xieting Zhou snorted coldly, when did it happen? What? When did you tell Shen Yan that you were attracted to Zhonglianzi? I forgot. Shen Yu quickly changed the subject. I never said that. In fact, she had forgotten it a long time ago. In her previous life, it had been a few years since she married Zhang Lianzi. Who could still remember it so clearly? Anyway, it would be best not to admit it at this moment. Xieting Zhou knew what was going on as soon as he looked at her eyes. He was still angry, pinched her chin, and whispered, "Say it or not. I'll kiss you here if I don't say it." Shen Yu glanced around a few times. There were maids and boys sweeping the courtyard nearby. She was not so thick-skinned, but she believed that Xieting Zhou could really do it in a fit of anger. "I said, I really forgot. It seems, I seem to have said Yushu Linfen, but I definitely didn't say that I was devoted to him." She looked around and saw that no one was paying attention. She stood on tiptoes and whispered to Xieting Zhou, "I am devoted to you now." Xieting Zhou's hair was instantly smoothed by these words. He looked down at her and said, "Stay back and face him. Stay away from him." Shen Yu said matter-of-factly, "I am far away from him, I am thousands of miles away from him." At noon, Xieting Zhou asked his eldest son to send a message to Uncle Zhong to move all Shen Yu's things from Lumingxian. After lunch, Shen Yu went back to see that the move was almost complete, but she didn't dare to move the things in the study. When Shen Yu and Xieting Zhou entered Lu Mingxuan's study, they heard that Li Jiafeng had come to visit. The maid left the study with her front legs, and Li Jiafeng stepped in with her back legs. "I'm here to give you a tip." Li Jiafeng glanced around. "Where's the tea?" "What's the matter?" Xieting Zhou asked the maid to serve tea. Li Jiafeng glanced at Shen Yu, undecided whether to speak or not. "Tell me," Xieting Zhou said, "there is no need to hide anything from her." Li Jiafeng nodded. "I just came out of the palace and met someone in front of Chengtian Gate." "Who do you think it is?" "Since it's an urgent matter, don't keep it secret," Xieting Zhou said calmly. "Boring," Li Jiafeng complained, and then said, "It's Marquis Xianping." Shen Yu said, "It's not unusual for Marquis Xianping to enter the palace." Li Jiafeng said, "It's not unusual, but the person he brings with him is strange." "Are you looking for an old man?" Xieting Zhou's eyes were sharp. Li Jiafeng said quickly, "Don't get me wrong, I took a look at a portrait in the study. Although my memory is not very good, I remember the wrinkles on his face very clearly. Marquis Xianping went to the Ministry of Punishment, and there were people around him. Follow that old man with the mole on his face. What do you think he is doing in the criminal department?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I Refuse to Marry the Scumbag and Marry the Prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 168. Shen Yu glanced at Xieting Zhou calmly. Xieting Zhou said nothing. Li Jiafeng said again, "Aren't you looking for that scoundrel old man? Go to the criminal department quickly." Xieting Zhou tilted his head slightly. "Who told you that I was looking for that old man? You don't regard me as one of your own, do you?" Li Jiafeng pointed at him. "You've all seen the portrait." "I asked someone to draw that portrait," Shen Yu answered. "There was a thief in my house before. I met the thief face to face. Then I searched for a while and couldn't find it. Just forget it. If you don't tell us, we still can't remember it. This guy is coming." Li Jiafeng couldn't trust any of the princes when he couldn't figure out the truth. Li Jiafeng didn't know whether he believed it or not, so he said "oh" in a low tone and avoided the topic. "What are you guys doing in the yard?" "Moving," Xieting Zhou said calmly. Li Jiafeng asked, "Are you really going to move to your yard?" "I'll keep an eye on it." Shen Yu glanced at Xieting Zhou. After leaving the study, she walked quickly, ready the horse. Shen Yu galloped all the way to the Wuchen Army and Horses Department. After dismounting, she didn't say a word and showed her waist badge at the door. Everyone had heard about this new nobleman in the court, a celebrity in front of Emperor Tongxue. When he saw Du Yahao's sign, he hurriedly invited him in. "Please, Mr. Yu." Shen Yu asked, "Where is Xiao Chuan?" "Master Xiao is inside, I will give you a message." "No need." Shen Yu waved her hand and walked straight in. Xiao Chuan was explaining things to two officials. When he heard the sound, he looked over and was startled when he saw the person coming. "Master Shi. I have something to ask you for." Shen Yu looked serious. Xiao Chuan knew there was a problem as soon as he heard this, so he asked the official to go down, closed the door and asked, "What's the matter?" Shen Yu unfolded a portrait with a swipe and placed it on the table. "Gui family, the ninth prince saw him when he left the palace." Marquis Xianping led people to the Ministry of Punishment. Xiao Chuan followed her all the way. If Shen Yu didn't trust him 100%, she would at least have 70% or 80% trust in him. She didn't know where he stood, but she was definitely not a lackey of those people. Xiao Chuan glanced at him, frowned and said, "This man looks a bit familiar." Shen Yu said, "Of course I am familiar with him. Have you forgotten that your troops from the 5 cities wanted this person 2 months ago?" "What do you mean?" Xiao Chuan's eyes flashed. "I understand, I will transfer people immediately, but the people from the criminal department have always looked down on our 5 cities soldiers and horses division, so I'm afraid they won't be able to come to the door for verification." Shen Yu said, "Just wait outside. I bet Marquis Xianping will bring people out." The prison of the Ministry of Punishment is heavily guarded and now houses 12 mountain bandits who were escorted back from Kiking. The prison was dark and damp. Gai Xiang stared blankly at the beam of light coming from the blowhole. When he heard the sound of footsteps, he raised his head. His old eyes were dim, but he didn't see clearly who was standing in front of the cell door. The boss. Gui Xiang took a closer look. Chu Wan. "I am the boss," Chu Wan said. Gai Xiang dragged his shackles and rushed over, grabbing the railing and looking carefully. Aren't you dead?" Chu Wan's eyes widened. "Who told the boss that we were dead?" "Then, what about Gui Chi and the others?" Gui Xiang showed doubts on his face. Chu Wan glanced around, lowered his voice and said, "They are in that person's house now, and it is inconvenient to go out. That person asked me to come and talk to the head of the family today. You must have been deceived. Let's you go to Beijing to identify it. This is a trap." Gai Xiang thought for a moment and then said, "Since you are still alive, why didn't you file a complaint?" Chu Wan was well prepared and said, "It's because we found out there was a misunderstanding. It's not that person who sent people to suppress the bandits. He has been delaying it for several months. It should be someone who wants to frame us so that we can rebel." Gai Xiang looked at Chu Wan. "Then what do you mean by coming here today?" "He asked me to remind you not to be instigated." Gui Xiang nodded. "Has he given half of the ledger I gave to Gui Chi to him now?" "Submitted." Chu Wan said, "It's just that the account books are incomplete, and the other half should still be in your hands, right?" Gui Xiang's hand that was holding the railing dropped. He looked at Chu Wan and slowly took a few steps back. "I really trusted the wrong person." Chu Wan was shocked and didn't know where the problem was. "What do you mean?" "What do you mean?" Gui Xiang sneered. "I didn't hand Gui Chi the account book at all. I just told it in front of you on purpose before setting off." Chu Wan's face darkened and he sighed, "Master, that's not what I want." "You killed them," Gai Xiang gritted his teeth. "It's not me." Chu Wan grabbed the railing and said, "In that case, I won't hide it from you. The 3 of them are dead. I hid in the capital for 2 months and was still caught. I don't want this to happen, but I want to survive." He escaped being wanted, but he was caught anyway. Marquis Xianping gave him a chance to live. He didn't want to die, so he had to seize it. Gui Xiang spat at him, afraid of death. Wan turned a deaf ear to his insults. I'm just here to deliver a message today. Don't blame me. Who doesn't want to live? If you didn't want to live, you wouldn't have taken such risks to do such a thing. That person also said that you 12 people can't escape the death penalty. Why don't you think more about the living people? There are still more than 1,000 lives on Sandpiper Mountain, old and young, big and small. Don't you think more about them? You, Gai Xiang's eyes were splitting. Despicable villain. Wan said, then think about it carefully. I'll leave first. After walking out of the prison of the criminal department, Wan looked around and saw the carriage parked at the entrance of the alley. He quickly walked over and talked against the window. I told him everything the Marquis wanted, but I didn't expect him to be so vigilant and found out that I was lying to him. I had no choice but to follow the Marquis instructions and move the people out of the Sandpiper Mountain to see if I could suppress them. Marquis Xianping tapped twice on the inner wall of the carriage and said, "You did a good job. We will go separately later, and you and Gang Gong will leave together." Wan nodded and bowed, "Yes, yes." He was originally worried that he would become an outcast if he failed to convince Gai Xiang, but now he breathed a sigh of relief. The carriage started moving. Nei Suanping Hao said in a low voice, "This person is useless. Clean him up if you remember." The guard nodded in agreement. As soon as Suanping Hao's carriage left, it was blocked by someone. Xiao Chuan stopped the carriage and hurried to greet him, "Master Marquis." Marquis Xianping opened the curtain and took a look. "Oh, it's Xiao Chuan." "Exactly," Xiao Chuan said with a smile, "my father wrote to me a few days ago and asked me about Mr. Marquis. We happened to meet him today. Nanya brought some lychees yesterday. I know Anan likes to eat them, so I just brought some. Go." Marquis Suanping's expression relaxed. "You are determined." Xiao Chuan said, "Then I won't waste Mr. Ho's time." As the carriage left, Xiao Chuan's face suddenly darkened. There was no one else in the car. Maybe they left people in the criminal department, the deputy commander on the side guessed. Xiao Chuan said solemnly, "Wait a little longer. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi." Chapter 169. Shen Yu found the nearest tea house on Yongning Street and waited for more than 2 hours. Clang. Xiao Chuan entered the box and closed the door, finally caught him. Shen Yu poured him tea. "It's been so long." "The stupid Marquis Xianping is really cunning." Xiao Chuan removed the knife and put it on the table. He raised his head and drank a cup of tea. Still feeling thirsty, he poured himself another cup. "Marquis Xianping leaves first. I have been waiting for 2 hours. If I don't have any patience, I will let him run away." "Where are the people?" Shen Yu asked. "Brought back the soldiers and horses division." Xiao Chuan said, "I deliberately didn't attack at the door. I followed quietly all the way. I didn't attack until they were about to silence them." "Guess what?" Xiao Chuan said with some excitement. "The old man recruited him before he returned to the army and horses division. Today, Marquis Xianping asked him to go to the Ministry of Punishments to put pressure on Guixiang and threaten the lives of those people on the mountain. Fortunately, you had expected it. Move all the people away, otherwise Guixiang might betray him with so many lives on his shoulders." Shen Yu pondered for a moment. "Marquis Xianping can't escape." Xiao Chuan said, "He is involved in the grain draft and should be involved in a case. I believe that soon the Ministry of Punishment will go to our 5 cities to recruit soldiers." Shen Yu took a look at the sky and then stood up. "Thank you for today's matter. If you have anything I can help with in the future, please let me know." After leaving the tea house, Shen Yu returned to the palace. After the move was completed, Shen Yu's things had been moved into Qingpu House, and there was only a wall between their bedrooms. When she heard that Xie Tingzhou was in the study, Shen Yu went directly to find him. Xiao Chuan has detained the old man in the Five Cities Army and Horses Division, Shen Yu said as she entered the door. He is willing to identify Marquis Xianping. Xie Tingzhou looked at her. Shen Yu didn't notice his look and said, Marquis Xianping is the prince's uncle, and this matter has nothing to do with the prince. Xie Tingzhou put down the book in his hand. Do you regret saving the prince? I don't regret it, Shen Yu said. Whatever he did, he deserves to be punished. If justice is not achieved, I don't mind killing him with my own hands to avenge my father. Xie Tingzhou said, we have the direction, but first there is a lack of evidence. The evidence from the grain draft can only point to Marquis Xianping. There is no solid evidence to prove that the prince is the mastermind behind it. How could Emperor Tongxue touch the prince so easily? Shen Yu's eyes were fixed in one place. You mean, if Marquis Xianping takes all the blame for himself, he will not be able to touch the prince? Xie Tingzhou nodded, and now everything is our inference. Even if we know that Marquis Xianping has a big problem, we have to wait for the Ministry of Punishments to review it before we can draw a conclusion. He walked to Shen Yu and stopped, placing 2 fingers between her eyebrows and rubbing them. Don't think about it, there are only 2 outcomes. If Marquis Xianping identifies the prince will be punished for his crime. If Marquis Xianping does not identify him, you will personally execute him. Shen Yu suddenly became enlightened. With the direction, the person behind it will die no matter what. Xie Tingzhou said, now, let's talk about other things. What did you say? Shen Yu raised her head. There was a thick stack of books on the desk. Xie Tingzhou took down the top one, looked at the cover and asked, have you read the 3-character classic? Of course I've seen it, what's wrong? Xie Tingzhou took down another book. Where's the book of documents? Shen Yu looked confused. Have you seen part of it? What's wrong? Xie Tingzhou waved her over, pulled her into his arms from behind, and spread the book in front of her. Then tell me, does it look good? The explicit pictures in the book were revealed in her eyes. Shen Yu froze, staring at the pictures for a long time and forgetting to react. Xie Tingzhou leaned against her ear, turned another page, and asked in a soft tone, does it look good? Shen Yu swallowed and tried to take the book out of his hand. It's okay. It's not bad, Xie Tingzhou said slowly. Then have you seen better ones? Shen Yu, no. A few months ago, Pei Chunli climbed over the wall to find her and threw a bag of good things at her. Shen Yu had no place to hide it, so she simply mixed it in the bookshelf in the study. As a result, as time went by, she told her about it. Forget. Moving today, she really didn't expect to be found out. Pei Chunli gave it to me. I put it in the study and forgot about it. Xie Tingzhou held her waist. Didn't you say you had seen it? Shen Yu explained, the ones I read are the serious 3-character classic and Shangshu, not this kind of Changong selling dog meat in sheep's clothing. I will have someone return it to Pei Chunli tomorrow. No need to return it, Xie Tingzhou said, 2 copies are missing. Huh? Shen Yu looked sideways at him. Li Jiafeng took away 2 books, Xie Tingzhou said. Do you know what Li Jiafeng's reaction was when he pulled out the Palace of Spring from the bookshelf? He held her waist and turned her around, looked at her and said, he asked me if I had tried this with you. Shen Yu's face suddenly turned red. Xie Tingzhou moved his fingers across her ear and neck, leaned over and said, keep it, I'll try it out eventually. After the beginning of summer, the sun rises earlier and earlier. When I went to court at Mao hour, it was already bright. All the civil and military officials were waiting outside the Fengtian Palace, and they were all curious about the new nobleman in Shengjing under the eaves. Shen Yu stood under the eaves of Fengtian Palace and looked at the civil and military officials outside the palace. For the first time, she felt that she was so close to the center of power of the great Zhou dynasty. The officials did not dare to make loud noises, some of them had nothing to do with themselves, and some of them whispered. Zhang Lianzi looked at Shen Yu. She wore a green python robe with brocade cloud shoulders. Different from the wide sleeves of civil and military officials, her cuffs were neatly collected. The belt tied her waist very beautifully. The sword on her waist was particularly dazzling in the morning light. His understanding of her seemed to remain in the soft and forbearing memory of her previous life. Zhang Lianzi was in a daze for a moment. Is this still the Au he knew? The person he slept with for 3 years? Suddenly, there was a small noise among the officials. Zhang Lianzi turned around and saw Xie Tingzhou, dressed in red official uniform, walking slowly. When he reached the front of the palace, he suddenly looked up and saw Shen Yu's position. All the officials knew that Du Yahao Shizhi, whom His Majesty had personally appointed, changed his master 3 times, and the previous master was the Balin crown prince in front of him. Everyone was quite curious as to whether Prince Balin had successfully placed someone beside Emperor Tongxiu, or whether Shi Yu had turned his back on his master and defected to someone else. Xie Tingzhou kept looking at her, but Shi Yu didn't react much. He only glanced at Xie Tingzhou for the first time and then looked away. The look between his brows and eyes was very indifferent, and the quick glance was extremely arrogant, with a hint of contempt. All the officials saw this and exchanged glances tacitly. Except for Xie Tingzhou, no one knew what that glance was about. The 2 of them slept on the same bed last night, and nothing happened. Xie Tingzhou endured it all night, but when she got up, he still couldn't hold it in. He hugged her and kissed her until her cheeks turned red, almost causing her to miss the moment. Xie Tingzhou looked away and couldn't help but curl the corner of his mouth slightly. He particularly liked her arrogant and frivolous appearance. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 170. While everyone was speculating on the subtle atmosphere between the 2, the princes came from the side of Fengtian Hall. Li Jifeng's sharp eyes saw Xie Tingzhou at a glance and ran forward. The sun is out in the west. Why do you think of going to court today? Xie Tingzhou withdrew his gaze from Shen Yu. Then why did you come to court? You don't know now, Li Jifeng said. Since I was crowned king, my father forced me to come to court every day. I have been going to court for a long time, but you don't know. Xie Tingzhou smiled and said, it's rare that you listened. I'm not stupid. Father wants to see me every day. Just one less glance, an idea flashed in Li Jifeng's mind. Oh, I understand. What do you know? Li Jifeng leaned over with a smile and whispered, you are here to see Shizhi too, right? Xie Tingzhou looked at him without comment. It's really pitiful. A pair of hard luck lovers were torn apart by my father. The only way to get a glimpse of them in the palace is to get up before dawn and go to court, Li Jifeng said sarcastically. Xie Tingzhou, a miserable Mandarin duck. Ignorant and ill-informed, Li Jifeng said, the male is the Mandarin duck. Xie Tingzhou didn't answer. From the corner of his eye, he saw Qi King Li Yanchang walking towards Xianping Marquis. Li Yanchang said, it's not hot this morning, why is Marquis Xianping sweating so much? Marquis Xianping raised his sleeves to wipe his sweat. The king of Qi was joking. He is getting older and has a little more anger. Li Yanchang said in a long tone, I thought Marquis Xianping was nervous, but I was overly worried. Marquis Xuanping's face turned as dark as ginger. He glanced at the Minister of Punishment and did not answer. However, Prince Li Jinqing came forward and said, Seventh brother seems to be criticizing Sang and why? Really? Li Yanchang raised his eyebrows, brother is too sensitive, I haven't said anything yet. Li Jinqing said with a straight face, it's best not to have one. Li Yanchang smiled and said, Marquis Xianping. He raised his chin and pointed in the direction of Su Yishan, Shangshu of the Ministry of Justice. I saw you glanced at Su Shangshu several times, as if something happened. If you have anything to say, why don't you come up and talk? A chill ran down Marquis Xuanping's spine, and he said without changing his expression, "I don't understand what King Qi means. I only pretended to understand after I heard something. This is the first time I heard someone understand something and pretended not to understand. However, I can always understand." Li Yanchang smiled, shook his sleeves and stood on the steps. Many officials looked at this episode and expected that there would be a storm in the palace later. Many people have heard about the Kikame case, but they don't know what stage the case has reached. Now, according to King Qi's words, it seems that it is closely related to Marquis Xianping. Marquis Xianping is the prince's uncle, so he has also involved the prince in this case. The whip was fired 3 times, and all the civil and military officials entered the hall one by one. Xie Tingzhou was the eldest son of Balin, and he was in the 3rd rank and commanded the ministerial affairs, second only to the cabinet. He was walking on the side close to Shen Yu, and his sleeve seemed to be touched carelessly as he passed by. Shen Yu could only feel the familiar smell lingering on the tip of her nose, and the gold-woven fabric caressed the back of her hand, causing a tingling sensation. That person just caressed and ignored the rest of the story. Shen Yu resisted the idea of scratching the back of her hand, and pressed her hand tightly on the knife. She then entered the Fengtian hall, walked around the officials, and stood upright under the dragon chair. The officials stood still before Emperor Tongxue came. When he sat on the dragon chair, he seemed to glance at Shen Yu. It took about half an hour for each department to report. Just when everyone thought that today's court meeting was over, many people breathed a sigh of relief. Emperor Tongxue held the dragon chair with one hand and spoke, "The Kikame bandits have been escorted to the capital. Is there any report from the Ministry of Punishment?" Su Yishan, the secretary of the Ministry of Punishment, came out and said, "Reporting to Your Majesty, the Ministry of Punishment has completed the trial of several important witnesses in this case, and the case has been sorted out. However, it concerns the royal family, and I cannot make a decision directly. I need to report it to the Holy Spirit first." As soon as these words came out, there was an uproar in the palace. Thinking of the incident outside Shike Palace, many officials had concerns in their minds. The sweat on Marquis Xuanping's forehead never stopped. He only heard Emperor Tongxue say, "Repay." Yes, Su Yishan bowed his head and said, "Last year, there was a war at Yanliang Pass, and the grain and grass were delayed and later robbed by bandits. In fact, the southwest granary was empty long ago, and the grain and grass shipped to Yanliang Pass was just a pair of waste. Just a stone." The leader of the 12 key criminals, Gui Xiong, is the bandit leader of Kikame. He pointed out that for more than 10 years, he colluded with officials from the DPRK and the central government to resell the grain and grass in the southwest granary, which resulted in the shortage of grain in the southwest granary. The defeat at Yanliang Pass came out. Marquis Xuanping's legs began to weaken. Immediately afterwards, Su Yishan looked at Ho Xianping. The person identified by the bandit leader is none other than Ho Xianping. "Nonsense," Marquis Xianping scolded, "Your Majesty, I don't know the bandit leader at all. Su Yishan slandered me in court. I think he formed a clique for personal gain and took the opportunity to clear obstacles and eliminate dissidents." When Su Yishan heard this, he quickly picked up his robe and knelt down. "If I don't have substantial evidence, I will never talk nonsense." "Where's the evidence?" Marquis Xianping pulled his neck and said, "I think you are obviously just talking nonsense." Su Yishan ignored his clamor and took out a piece of testimony from Cao Hong, the Minister of Punishment. Defu went down to take the testimony and presented it to Emperor Tongxue for review. "Your Majesty," Su Yishan said, "this is the confession of 12 mountain bandits in Kishan. A series of people are involved in it. The Ministry of Punishment has been arranging it day and night. One of them is a close associate of Xianping Ho, and his confession is also among them." Emperor Tongxue had already read the confessions of those 12 people, and after a cursory glance at them, after reading the rest of the confessions, Emperor Tongxiu asked in a deep voice, Marquis Xianping, do you have anything to say? Your Majesty. Xianping Ho knelt down, this case is suspicious. If I really did it, how could they find it so easily? Su Yishan was filled with righteous indignation, easy? Marquis Xianping said it is simple. If Du Yuhao hadn't taken the risk to reduce losses when suppressing the bandits, how would we be today? Once the suppression of the bandits was successful, all witnesses and material evidence would be lost. You, Marquis Xianping, beat him good calculation. Slander. It's pure slander. I'm a decent person, but you say I emptied the granary, so why did I empty the granary? There must be a source for the money. The source is from you, Marquis Xianping, who went to the Imperial Palace and Dali Temple to explain it clearly. Okay, Marquis Xianping said with a smile, Your Majesty has not even given the order yet, but you, the Minister of Punishment, have already anticipated that the three divisions will interrogate. Li Jinqing's eyes moved back and forth between the two people who were arguing, and he was filled with surprise and uncertainty. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 171. After thinking about it again and again, he came out and said, Father, my uncle often teaches his sons and ministers to be diligent and love the people. I think this case is full of doubts. He should not be such a person. In an instant, you could hear a needle drop in the palace. Li Jinqing lowered his head and maintained the same posture as before. He could not see Emperor Tongxiu, but felt a sharp gaze falling on his head. He regretted it, he shouldn't have said this. Everyone knew that Marquis Xianping was his uncle, and if something happened to Marquis Xianping, it would be equivalent to him losing power. Cold sweat broke out and wet his back. Emperor Tongxiu suddenly spoke, above the main hall, there are only monarchs and ministers, not father and son, let alone uncles. Here comes someone, Emperor Tongxiu said unhurriedly, take Marquis Xianping into custody for verification. The chief officer in front of the palace came forward to arrest Marquis Xianping. Your Majesty, Marquis Xianping fought hard, who supported you so much that you were able to sit in the position you are in today? You can't just kill the donkey. Emperor Tongxiu grabbed the armrest and leaned forward. At that moment, he really had murderous intentions. He reigned for 19 years, during which the Marquis Xianping's palace became more honorable and favored. It was because he had been helped to ascend the throne in the first place that Marquis Xianping could now say such things as killing the donkey. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Marquis Xianping roared and was dragged out of Fengtian Palace. Li Jinqing couldn't help feeling like his lips were dying and his teeth were cold. Marquis Xianping was a big help in supporting him. Many ministers in the court who favored Li Zhaonian criticized him. In recent years, there have been many attempts to establish another prince. If Marquis Xianping is gone, what should he do? How to suppress those old guys? The biggest question now is, what should I do if I get involved? The night was getting dark. Shen Yu had just taken over Yu Ho's errand. She was not familiar with many things and would have to stay in the palace for several days. The imperial doctors entered the Suanhui palace and came out half an hour later. All of them were sweating profusely. Shen Yu stood under the eaves, thinking about the reactions of everyone in the palace today. The frightened prince, Li Yanchang, who took pleasure in the misfortune, Li Zhaonian, who took it indifferently, and Li Jiafeng, who watched the excitement. As for Emperor Tongxiu's attitude, she still couldn't see clearly whether he wanted to protect the prince. She thought of Xieting Zhou again. From the beginning to the end, he seemed to be out of touch, except for passing his gentle eyes over her from time to time. The night is already deep. A eunuch came over and saluted Shen Yu, Yu Ho. Shen Yu nodded lightly. What's the matter? The eunuch said, this slave is here to deliver a message. He asked you not to stay up late at night and go back to the duty room to rest. May I have your name? Song of my life, my slave, the eunuch said. There were so many demons and monsters in the Forbidden Palace that Shen Yu couldn't believe anyone. Who is that? Shun Shao smiled and presented something. That person said, you will know after you see it. Shen Yu took it and saw that it was the jade pendant that Xie Tingzhou had tied around his waist. Seeing that she believed her, Shun Shao said with a smile, I said that you are too casual about food on weekdays, so I told the slave to prepare food. When you get off duty, you will go to the duty room to rest. If you need anything, call the eunuch outside the duty room. Shen Yu nodded in agreement, and after a while she went back to check in to rest. There are dishes on the table and they are warmed in a charcoal basin under the drawer, but they are not cold at this time. As soon as Shen Yu opened the lid, a note fell out. It's non-toxic, feel free to eat. It's Xie Tingzhou's handwriting. Shen Yu felt relieved, holding the bowl and eating a little full, then strolled outside the duty room for a while. Just as he was about to go back and rest, he heard a cry of killing. There's an assassin. Catch the assassin. Protect His Majesty. The sound came from Suanhui Hall. Shen Yu was startled, turned around, took the knife and rushed out. The check-in room was not far from Suanhui Hall, and the closer we got, the louder the sound of fighting became. The torches were lit outside the Suanhui Palace, and countless imperial guards rushed towards the Suanhui Palace. There were only 3 assassins, each with strong skills. They fought hard when the situation was not right, and opened a hole in the weak spot of the Forbidden Army. All the personnel rushed to Suanhui Hall, but the place where the Imperial Guards guarded the room was extremely quiet. Walk. The leading assassin's face was covered with black cloth, leaving only a pair of narrow and sharp eyes. He was so powerful that one of the forbidden soldiers' arms was broken off at shoulder level with one strike. He kicked one person away, turned around and rushed towards the palace wall, heading towards the direction where the Imperial Guards were on duty. 3 black-clothed assassins ran wildly on the roof, countless arrows raining down from the sky. There was a clanking sound, and all the arrows that came close were shot down. Go northwest, there are fewer people there. The assassin led by him was obviously very familiar with the palace's defenses. The target on the roof was too big, and it was easy for others to see the direction of escape and chase him, so he jumped off the eaves and walked quietly in the palace alley. Just as I turned the corner, a ray of cold light flashed under the moon. The assassin walking in the front quickly blocked it with his knife. Clang! The assassin took a step back, his hand was numb from the shock, and he almost lost the knife in his hand, looking at the person in shock. The assassin glanced at the knife in his hand, and saw that a gap had been opened by the blow just now. If he hadn't been in deep danger, he would have really wanted to praise the knife. Good work. As expected, there is no shortage of masters in Aoki. He clenched the knife in his hand and took a step back calmly. The footsteps behind him were getting closer and closer, and it was his companion who was catching up. If he was alone, he might not be able to come back today, but fortunately he still had companions. The other 2 assassins chased after him. Why don't you leave? After saying that, I saw a person standing in the shadow. The man's tip of the knife was pressed against the ground, and his hands were folded to hold the handle of the knife. She stood in the darkness, and the moonlight peeked out from the wall, creating a split light and shadow between her figure and the knife. Only the knife looked chilly under the moonlight. We've come here, but we have to leave something behind, Shen Yu said, slowly raising the knife. You go first, I'll stop you later. The assassin leader waved away the 2 people in front of him, raised his knife and attacked. After Shen Yu took the blow forcefully, she realized that the assassin's kung fu was really not weak, at least equal to hers, or even better. Shen Yu didn't dare to make excuses, and had no time to take care of the other two men in black. She concentrated on fighting with the people in front of her. There was a clanging sound of weapons clashing, and the cold light on the palace road splashed like flying snow. At the other end of the palace road, there were already numerous forbidden troops chasing after them. As the weapons connected, Shen Yu took a step back, and the assassin took advantage of this gap to jump onto the wall. Shen Yu chased after the assassin, and they both jumped onto the roof. The assassin turned around and made a flickering move. Shen Yu drew her knife to block the attack, but stopped abruptly in the middle of the move and withdrew her attack. That move, that familiar move. Shen Yu stared at the assassin with an expression of disbelief, and her heart almost jumped out of her chest. During the fight, I was stunned for a moment, as if between life and death, the blade was already in front of my eyes. Shen Yu leaned back, her waist bent to an incredible degree, and her feet moved diagonally backward. This movement technique was so exquisite that if it weren't for the eaves of the palace that were in disrepair, she could have completely avoided it. Unfortunately, the moment she moved, the sound of shattering glazed tiles could be clearly heard in her ears. Her feet slipped immediately, she lost her balance, and fell heavily towards the eaves. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 172. All movements are instinctive. She stretched out her hand to cling to the eaves of the palace, but her wrist suddenly tightened, and her body's downward momentum stopped. Shen Yu raised her head and looked up. The assassin was holding the eaves with one hand and holding her tightly with the other. The hand holding her was unusually thin. He turned his back to you, so that she couldn't see the assassin's face clearly, and she could only feel that there was a pair of eyes looking deeply at her. Shen Yu trembled. You. The glazed tiles fell to the ground and shattered. Over there, the guard heard the sound and chased after him. Go quickly, Shen Yu said. The assassin grabbed her and lifted her up suddenly, causing Shen Yu to fall on the eaves. The assassin didn't spare a glance before turning around and walking away. Wait a minute, Shen Yu whispered and said quickly, don't go to the northwest, go to the southwest. The Forbidden Palace has changed its defense. The assassin didn't stop, seemed to have no doubt about her words, and ran straight to the southwest. There was no time to think. Shen Yu looked at the imperial guards who were chasing after her. She raised her hand and slashed her arm. She gritted her teeth and endured the pain, and deliberately fell towards the eaves. There was a bang sound. At the same time as they landed, the imperial guard also arrived. It's Marquis Duyu. Hearing the sound, the assassin paused slightly, but still headed southwest. Shen Yu lay on the ground, propped herself up and raised her hand to point in the opposite direction, saying, Assassin, the assassin is going that way. Even though she found a good angle when she landed, her whole body still hurt from the fall, especially the knife on her arm. The guards helped her up, leaving the two of them behind while the others chased towards the northwest. Don't worry about me, Shen Yu broke away from the guard's support, you go and help. Such a big thing happened in the palace, and Zhong'an was ordered to come from outside the palace. When it was time to check in, Shen Yu was bandaging the wound on her arm. When she heard footsteps, she untied the half-wrapped gauze. After Zhong'an entered the door, he immediately saw his arm resting on the table. The wound was not small and serious. Why is it so injured? Zhong'an said. Commander Shen Yu twisted the gauze around, put down her sleeves and stood up. The look just now was enough to clear herself of suspicion. Zhong'an sat down opposite her and asked, how are those people doing? It's very unusual. Shen Yu raised her arm, the commander also saw it. If there is only one person, I can barely defeat him, but there is really nothing I can do with three people. Zhong'an said, don't worry too much. Just understand it. Can you tell which technique the assassin used? Shen Yu lowered her eyes, pretended to think about it, shook her head and said, I can't tell. It looks a bit like the Zhigong sword, but it's a sword. I really can't tell the difference. This is normal, Zhang said, since you want to enter the palace to assassinate, you will definitely deceive others, how can you expose your flaws at will? Shen Yu said, I have gone to ask His Majesty to apologize for not catching the assassin. When Zhang heard this, he knew that Emperor Tongxue had no intention of punishing him, and he was indeed the popular person in front of Emperor Tongxue. Zhang was also happy to be a favor, you have worked hard tonight. After bandaging the wound, go back and rest. Shen Yu said, it's just a flesh wound. Don't waste your body just because you're young. Zhang said, when we reach our age, physical problems will start to show up. It's better to go back. Seeing Shen Yu's expression of confusion, Zhang asked, what's wrong? Are you in trouble? Shen Yu smiled bitterly and said, to be honest with the commander, the house outside the palace has not been set up yet, so I don't have a place to stay for the time being. Zhang was stunned for a moment, then Balin Palace, well, what I mean is. Prince Balin always took this guard with him wherever he went, so it had long been spread inside and outside the palace that Prince Balin and the current Du Yahao were somewhat connected in private. I understand, Shen Yu said, I had a falling out with the crown prince. As for the reason, I think the commander can also guess it. Zhang thought for a moment, but when he went to court in the morning, the way Xieting Zhou looked at Shi Yu was really not innocent. Seeing that he still had doubts, Shen Yu said, if there is another way, who would want to be controlled by others? Zhang understood now that Prince Balin indulged in pleasures and had no taboos about men and women, and Shijie, a guard, had no right to make his own choices. Now that he has become the Marquis of Duyu and has a bright future, who would still want to serve others with sex? Zhang wanted to subdue this man, so he said, since you don't have a place to live, why not come to my house and stay as long as you want? Shen Yu looked at Zhang intently until he suddenly understood. Don't get me wrong. I still have a wife and children at home, so I definitely don't mean it. Besides, I'm not a manly woman, Zhang explained. Shen Yu lowered her eyes, sir, you are joking. I have asked someone to take care of it. I will just stay in the palace for a few days. After the misunderstanding just now, Zhang didn't try to persuade others, lest people think he was up to no good. Our front minister also has a doctor. Let the doctor handle it for you later. No need, Shen Yu said, I don't like getting close to others. Zhang Angzhen thought that this person who had been a man's favorite disliked men's touch the most. He didn't force it, then you rest first and I'll go watch the patrol. Shen Yu stood up and said goodbye, command the commander to walk slowly. After Zhang left, Shun Xiao came over, followed by a palace maid holding a tray. Master Yahao, Shun Xiao said, this is Longqi, one of our own. Please, Master Yahao, please lift up your sleeves and let Longqi bandage it for you. After Shun Xiao finished speaking, he went out and closed the door. Shen Yu opened her sleeves. The bandage had not been bandaged yet, and blood came out again. Longqi took a breath of cold air and said, Sir, this wound is not small. I'm afraid it needs to be sutured. Just sew it up, Shen Yu said. Longqi didn't dare to do anything, I don't know how to sew wounds. You always sew clothes, right? Envhong knows how to do it. Longqi looked at the wound, how about informing? You dare. These two words were plain and indifferent, but they had a sound when they fell to the ground. Longqi did not dare to speak under that majesty. Just so if I ask you to, Shen Yu said calmly. Anyone with some power would not put some spies in the palace, and Longqi was the person placed in the palace by Balin Palace. Longqi had only seen Yahao from a distance before. At that time, she felt that his body was not that burly, but his whole body was full of aura. This is completely different from the eunuchs on duty in the palace. Even if he reaches the position of Telford's handprint, he still has to bend his back when meeting his master. This is because he has been a slave for a lifetime and can no longer straighten his back. "Sir, it's been bandaged," Longqi said, sweating profusely. This Yahoo was indeed not an ordinary person. He stitched up the wound like this but never uttered a word. Longqi warned, "Sir, don't get wet or use force in the near future to avoid the wound opening again." Shen Yu nodded slightly and said, "Let Shun Xiao come in." Shun Xiao entered the duty room and said, "If you have any orders from Marquis Yu, just ask him." I said, "Seeing you is like seeing him. Don't tell him a word about my injury tonight." Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 173. Shun Xiao was a little embarrassed. "This, I have ordered." "Isn't my order an order?" Shen Yu raised her eyelids and looked. Shun Xiao only felt that the look in his eyes was really similar to that of the crown prince, with invisible power in his eyes. Shen Yu said, "Don't complain. Just spread the word that there is an assassin in the palace. I won't go back in the next few days." Shun Xiao was in a dilemma when he heard her ask again, "Do you understand everything?" I understand," Shun Xiao nodded quickly and took Long Kui out. The room fell silent. Only then did Shen Yu have time to review what happened tonight. From the beginning to the end, she never saw the assassin's face, only the flash of that move, and the movement was too similar to Shen Zhao's style of play. And when she was about to fall, the man caught her, which further deepened her suspicion. If he wasn't an acquaintance, how could he help her at the critical moment? Delaying that moment would have been enough for him to run further, but he chose to hold her back. Shen Yu opened the door and walked out. "Is there any news about the assassin?" The night guard replied, "Not yet." Shen Yu nodded, "That's fine if not." She couldn't leave the palace now, firstly because she didn't want Xie Tingzhou to find out that she was injured, and secondly because she wanted to stay in the palace so that she could learn about the assassin as soon as possible. If it is really my brother. Shen Yu's heart was beating wildly. If it was true, that would be great. The moon hid behind the clouds at some point. The night was endlessly dark. The three men in black separated in the dark alley. The tallest man stood there without moving. He looked back at the direction of the palace wall before slowly walking into the night. The alley has 7 twists and turns, and at the end there is an inconspicuous house near the river, with 3 cabins and a small courtyard. The man in black walked to the door, but suddenly stopped. The light is on in the room. He stood at the door for a long time, mustering up his courage, and then opened the door. I expected to see a figure reflected in the door and window, but I saw someone sitting under the eaves, leaning against a pillar and falling asleep. He stared blankly for a long time, then slowly pulled off his scarf, revealing an extraordinary face. He slowly approached, squatted in front of the person, looked at her face, and called her softly, "Late Autumn." Yuan Kai was just very sleepy and took a nap. When she heard the sound, she opened her eyes and saw that he was wearing night clothes. She tacitly agreed not to ask why. He just said, "You're back, Shen Zhao. You're not hurt, are you?" "No." Shen Zhao did not miss the joy and happiness that flashed in her eyes, and asked her, "Why are you sleeping here? Isn't it cold?" "It's not cold, I brought you something to eat," Yuan Kai laughed. When he stood up, his legs went numb, and Shen Zhao reached out to support him. "Isn't it easy to come out? I bribed the servants at the back door. I just need to go back before dawn," Yuan Kai said. Shen Zhao held her arm and didn't want to let go, but said, "You don't have to run to me all the time, I don't lack anything here." Yuan Kai didn't seem to hear the rejection in his mouth, and said to herself, "You don't tell me what you like to eat, I just make it blindly." "Did you do it yourself?" "Yeah," Yuan Kai said, "You try it?" If you don't like it, I'll make a few different ones next time. Shen Zhao's throat was sore. She is such a delicate, rich lady who has no fingers in the sun, but she personally cooks for him. What else does she not understand? Shen Zhao let go of his hand and entered the house without saying a word. Yuan Kai touched the bowl and found that it was already cold. I'm going to heat it up. It's not good to eat it cold in the middle of the night. No need. Shen Zhao pressed her arm lightly and started eating. Yuan Kai looked at him quietly with a gentle smile on his face, as if just looking at him quietly like this would be enough. Shen Zhao swept away all the food on the table. He used to eat a lot in the military camp, unlike Au, who ate like bird food. He used to laugh at her because she ate less and wouldn't grow taller. Today, Shen Zhao put down his bowls and chopsticks and said secretly, I saw Au. Yuan Kai asked, is she okay? Shen Zhao frowned, I fought with her, and her kung fu has improved again. It's a good thing to be diligent, Yuan Kai said. Shen Zhao glanced sideways at her, but couldn't say anything. How to tell her that kung fu is not just about practicing hard, but also about surviving in actual combat and fighting in order to achieve breakthroughs. He didn't know how much hardship Au had to endure these days to transform into what she is today. As a brother, he failed to protect her, and he felt very sad. She became the Duyahao. Shen Zhao said in a low tone, I only heard that there was a Duyahao of Shizhi. I wasn't sure it was her at first. Yuan Kai curled her fingers, mustered up the courage to hold his hand, and said comfortingly, don't worry, Au has been different from other girls since she was a child. She has made it this far, naturally she has her own plans. Shen Zhao could feel Yuan Kai's hands shaking slightly. She was afraid that he would push her away and reject her, but how could he let her go? He has nothing to give now. The great revenge has not been avenged, and every day is like walking on the tip of a knife, so how can he be willing to drag her into the chaos? Shen Zhao looked at the back of her slender hand and did not hold it back, but he was not willing to pull away. The meeting between him and Yuan Kai started more than a month ago. In the battle at Yanliang Pass, he fought until the last moment. When he fell, he thought that he would not fail the great Zhou in this life, but in the end it was the great Zhou that failed him. Before closing his eyes, he made 3 wishes. First, I wish that Au would be safe in this life. Second, I wish that I would not be a Zhou person in the next life. And third, I wish that I would always be with you in the next life. But he was not dead. He was taken away from the pile of corpses by the guard Kong Cheng. He went back and forth in the Hell Gate, and was finally pulled back by force, only to hear that his father and Au were both dead. He hated it. Why was he the one left behind? He wanted to commit suicide countless times, but he survived because of the piercing hatred. The great revenge has not been avenged, so what qualifications does he have to go see his father and Au? Shen Zhao had been recovering from his injuries for several months and had just left for Beijing more than a month ago. On his way back to Beijing, he happened to meet Yuan Kai, who was besieged by refugees. Only then did he know that after the defeat of Yanliang Pass, Yuan Kai set off from Shengjing to Yanliang Pass. She didn't believe he was dead and searched for him at the border for months. Later, her hopes failed, and she fell seriously ill. After recovering from her illness, she left the border and returned to Beijing at the end of March. Shen Zhao only knew that he owed her one more person in this life. Don't worry too much, Yuan Kai called out to bring him back from his thoughts. I have to worry, Shen Zhao said. She has had a strong temper since she was a child. She took such a desperate risk and entered the palace just because she wanted revenge. The Shen family is not dead yet, and with me as the elder brother here, it is not her turn. Go on an adventure. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Treating the Concubine, Eliminating the Wife, Reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince author, Gigi. Chapter 174. The morning light spread out a white line on the horizon, and the sky was half bright. There was a lot of noise in the palace last night, and Shen Yu didn't sleep all night. In the morning, she heard that the assassin had not been caught, and the sigh in her throat relaxed. Outside Fengtian Hall, going to court every day is the same as before. It turned out that Shen Yu was injured last night, and the commander Zhang An asked her not to be on duty. She was worried that if she didn't show up, Xieting Zhou would definitely notice something unusual. It's just that Xieting Zhou came extra early today, maybe because he heard that something happened in the palace. Xieting Zhou raised his eyes and glanced at the steps. Shen Yu was still standing under the eaves, not in the same row as the civil and military officials. He stepped forward and said, "Master Shi." Shen Yu's eyes paused on his face for a moment, and then moved away. Why does His Royal Highness want to see this official? Xieting Zhou scanned her up and down and found nothing unusual about her. After all, you have been my bodyguard for so long, and now you turn your back on me as soon as you get promoted. He sighed and said, "Shijie, you are so ruthless." Shen Yu pursed her lips. She didn't expect him to be so arrogant outside Fengtian Palace. The Crown Prince is joking. They are all doing errands for His Majesty. How can you turn your back on him? When you meet the Crown Prince, subordinates still have to bow as usual. Xieting Zhou crossed his arms and said, "Why don't we choose a day to meet the sun? Why don't we invite you to our house for a chat after the court today?" Shen Yu said, "Sorry, I'm on duty today." Xieting Zhou smiled and said in a high tone, "This is your fault. You see that I am sincere, but you refused so simply. It hurts my heart." Such words coupled with such a face really make people feel that they are somewhat ungrateful. But how can people accept this? Zhang An was originally standing 4 or 5 meters away from Shen Yu. Hearing this, he stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, my subordinate has made you unhappy." "It's quite unpleasant." Xieting Zhou kept his gaze fixed. "Master, she can't even invite me if I don't give you a compliment." His behavior was seen by hundreds of officials, and everyone had different thoughts. Li Yanchang stood beside Li Zhaonian and asked, "Fourth brother, do you think the two of them are falling out now is true or false?" "Li Zhao's age has nothing to do with him, what does it have to do with me if it's true or false?" Li Yanchang sneered and didn't bother to talk. Zhang An saw that Shen Yu was trying to evade him in every possible way, but Xieting Zhou was making things difficult in every possible way. He was determined to protect Shijie and said, "There was an incident in the palace last night. The imperial guards and the palace chief have been unable to leave in the past few days. How about this, when we turn around and have time, I will come to make things easier for you two to settle the old feud. What do you think?" Xieting Zhou glanced sideways. "Of course that's good, but I don't know if Du Yahao will give me this face." "Shen Yu really wanted to say that enough is enough for you." She stared into Xieting Zhou's eyes and said, "His Highness's face will naturally be given to you by your subordinates. I wonder how much my face is worth." Looking at that look, Xieting Zhou knew that he couldn't tease him anymore, and he would be annoyed if he teased her anymore. "Nature is priceless," Xieting Zhou said. He had done enough drama today, so he stopped when he was ready. Li Jiafeng happened to be late, so he went to the side to talk to Li Jiafeng. When Xieting Zhou walked away, Zhang An spat, "It's too much for him to pester Xieting Zhou like this. No wonder he comes to court for days. Don't pay attention to him. Don't worry, he will work under my hand. I will protect him with you." He couldn't get rid of Xieting Zhou at that time, so he sympathized with her even more. Shen Yu smiled and said, "Thank you, Commander. It's all little things." After going down to court, Emperor Tongxue returned to Hanshang Hall. Shen Yu saw that his steps were sloppy, which meant that he was already empty inside. He relied on medicine and perseverance to hold him up. She didn't know which day the string would break when the medicine and stone had no effect, and it would be the time to die. After Emperor Tongxue finished approving a bunch of memorials, Defu immediately took the hot tea. Emperor Tongxue took a sip and looked at Shen Yu at the door. I just heard today that you were injured last night, and I didn't see you mention it. Shen Yu lowered her head and said, I don't think I need to go to heaven to hear such trivial matters. Emperor Tongxue put down the tea and asked again, is Anan still kneeling outside? Shen Yu said, yes. You go, Emperor Tongxue said, let him go back. I won't see him. Shen Yu walked out of Han's Hang Hall and saw Pei Chunli kneeling upright at the foot of the steps. The sun is shining brightly in May, and this is the time when the sun is at its most fierce. Pei Chunli has been kneeling since morning. His cheeks are red from the sun, he is sweating profusely, and there are faint signs of heat stroke. Shen Yu waved to the waiter to take the umbrella and walked down the steps. Pei Chunli has been a noble person since he was a child. He has never suffered such hardship. He knelt down blankly, and a pair of shoes and a piece of the hem of a python robe appeared in his field of vision. He slowly raised his head, saw the person coming, and immediately cried, Ayu! Go back. Shen Yu held the umbrella above his head, Your Majesty won't see you. Pei Chunli's lips were chapped, and they were torn as soon as he opened his mouth. He grabbed the hem of Shen Yu's clothes and said, Can you help me talk to my uncle? You are a popular person around him now. I only need a stick of incense, no, a cup of tea, okay. Since his rebirth, Pei Chunli had provided her with help many times. The first time he asked her for help was because of Marquis Xianping. Marquis Xianping emptied the southwest granary, leaving Yan Liangwen empty of preparations for World War I. Although Liang Jianfang and Ji Liangji have been executed, can they clear up their relationship with Marquis Xianping? Cannot. The man in front of her was the son of her enemy, but he was the one who treated her best since her rebirth, besides Xie Zhou and her grandmother. But what's wrong with him? Shen Yu turned her face away, sorry, I can't. Pei Chunli stared at her blankly, why? Aren't you going to help me? I can't help you, Shen Yu said. Two huge tears rolled down from Pei Chunli's eyes. Shen Yu really saw disappointment and sadness in those tears. I understand. Pei Chunli nodded slowly, I understand. When a tree falls, the hosen scatters, when a wall falls, everyone pushes it away, he murmured, I begged a lot of people. Those who usually stepped through the threshold and wanted to come to the door, but now I can't even see them. They say they're gone. Dad, I am the biggest waste in Shengjing, and now, even you ignore me. Shen Yu's throat felt sore. Pei Chunli, listen to me, even if you meet His Majesty, what can you change? Right and wrong are all matters of justice. If I help you, I will be sorry for those who died in vain. The verdict hasn't been decided yet, Pei Chunli yelled. I haven't found out yet. My father is not that kind of person. He told me to be a good person. He said I could be a playboy all my life, but I couldn't dirty myself. He even told me not to dirty myself. How could he be such a person? Shen Yu knelt down in front of him and said, Anan. Pei Chunli heard her call him by his nickname for the first time and looked at her blankly, you want to help me, right? He still held out hope. Treating the concubine, eliminating the wife, reborn, I refuse to marry the scumbag and marry the prince. Author, Gigi. Chapter 175. Shen Yu persuaded, some things are not what you see on the surface. Go back. It's time for you to learn to grow up. This is how she came here. She herself grew up overnight after her father passed away. When there is no one left around you, you can only learn to be strong. This kind of growth is so painful. I won't leave. Pei Chunli started crying again and said, but I'm not here, where should I go? I don't know. Shen Yu felt sad for a while, go back and take a nap. When I wake up, I'm thinking about where to go. She raised her hand and tapped the back of Pei Chunli's neck, then handed the unconscious Pei Chunli to the chamberlain. He ordered, "Send the young marquis back to his mansion. If anyone dares to take advantage of the marquis's loss of power and bully him, let them ask about my sword first." The chamberlain said, "Yes, Marquis Yu." After watching the chamberlain send Pei Chunli away, Shen Yu went back to report to Emperor Tongxiu. When she got off duty in the evening, she drove to Lu's shop to see shopkeeper Lu. "I happened to be looking for Miss, so she came to my door," shopkeeper Lu said. "Has who sent something again?" "It just arrived yesterday. It's the medicinal materials that Miss was looking for last time." There were 2 brocade boxes on the table. Shopkeeper Lu pointed at the brocade boxes and said, "This is Qianling ginseng. It was originally in the warehouse of the old house in Hezhu. This black knot grass was purchased from the barbarians west of Zihu. It has not been seen before. I don't know if it's true or not, so I'll take it with you soon." "No need," Shen Yu said, "send it to the palace in person. Don't tell me that I have been here today. Just say that I have already ordered you to send it to the palace after receiving it." Shopkeeper Lu didn't ask much. "Okay. One more thing." Shen Yu frowned slightly. "I seem to have met my brother." Shopkeeper Lu was shocked. "Eldest young master? Hasn't the eldest young master already?" Shen Yu said, "I'm not completely sure, I'm 70% to 80% sure, but I can't figure out why he didn't come to me if it was my brother. Maybe the eldest young master has other things to do," shopkeeper Lu said. Shen Yu touched the box and said, "If you inquire for me, you must do it secretly." "I know, miss, please don't worry. If you find him, tell him I want to see him." She thought of the jug of wine in front of her father's grave. She originally thought that Shen Yan had gone to visit the grave. Looking back now, Shen Yan's reaction at that time was indeed a bit unusual, but she didn't think about her brother at that time. Shen Yu secretly returned to Shen's mansion again. The house deeds have been cleared, and many of the servants in the house have been dismissed, making it much easier to get in and out. Shen Yu returned disappointed. She actually knew in her heart that her brother would not return to Shen's house, but she still wanted to try her luck. She hurried back to the palace before the keys were locked, and went to the check-in room to rest. "Yahao! Yahao!" The guards all saluted. Shen Yu nodded in greeting and closed the door after entering the room. The moment she closed the door, she noticed something was wrong. She was about to take action, but she fell silent again in the familiar aura. A figure approached in the darkness, and the faint pine scent became a little stronger. So careless Yeting Zhou stepped forward and said, "What if he is a bad guy?" "Aren't you bad?" Shen Yu looked up at him. It was too dark in the room and there were no lights on. Only the scorching eyes fell on her face as if they had substance. "The prince is not good enough to you. You are so greedy." Yeting Zhou scolded her and trapped her by the door. "How did you know it was me?" "I smell it." Yeting Zhou smiled, "Dog nose." Shen Yu asked, "Why are you here?" "I still want to ask you," Yeting Zhou said. "I've been waiting for you for an hour. Where did you go?" Shen Yu did not answer directly and said, "I am on duty in front of the emperor and have many errands." Yeting Zhou felt that the room was too dark for him to see her face clearly. Yeting Zhou had to keep her by his side all the time to feel comfortable. "I wonder if I can take a few glances." "Don't light the lamp." Shen Yu noticed his intention and called out to him, "If there is a shadow, you can see it outside." Yeting Zhou held her forehead in this posture. "It's really difficult to see you now. If I don't go to court, I won't be able to see you even once in 3 to 5 days. He was too close, and Shen Yu quietly moved her injured left arm to the side. Shen Yu said, "After these few days of busy work, you can dash." Yeting Zhou blocked her lips and held the last few words of that sentence between his lips. The hand on her waist tightened, causing her to tremble. Yeting Zhou whispered, "When I went to court, I saw you wearing court clothes. I wanted to kiss you right then, but it's a pity that I can't see or touch you. It's a waste of time. Shen Yu was scalded by her breath. She tilted her face slightly and panted, you were so arrogant in Chaoshang today. Then what can we do? Xieting's whose eyes were a little dangerous, you want to draw a clear line with me in front of people. The more we don't interact with each other, the less likely they will believe it. Don't you have to do enough tricks first? Besides, I thank you in their eyes, Ting Zhou is a libertine, and if he is sent to Emperor Tongxiu to impeach me, there will be only a few more tricks, so what are you afraid of? Shen Yu said, usual impeachment is just to say that you are not doing your job properly and behave wildly. If you are really impeached for forming a party for personal gain, the problem will be huge. I don't care. Xieting Zhou looked at her, if the day comes, why don't I just prove the crime? Shen Yu immediately covered his mouth and said, stop talking. I heard you. Shen Yu nudged his chest and said, stay away from me. What's wrong? Xieting Zhou didn't move. Too hot. Is it hot? Xieting Zhou turned his head and rubbed it along her forehead, picking up some sweat. How come it's hot? He said seductively, is it the body that's hot, or the heart that's hot? Thank you Ting Zhou, Shen Yu said warningly. Xieting Zhou also felt hot. His clothes were even thinner in summer, and his waist was not full under his palms, making him reluctant to let go. How did you get in tonight? Shen Yu asked. Xieting Zhou let her go, you came in so arrogantly, who dares to stop me? You. Shen Yu really didn't know what to say to him, so she could only pour a cup of cold tea and drink it. It won't work if it's too quiet, Xieting Zhou said. After saying this, he suddenly grasped her waist, turned her, and lifted her onto the table. With a clang, the teacup on the table was swept to the ground by him, which was particularly obvious at night. Shen Yu kicked him silently, listening to the footsteps approaching. The Imperial Guard knocked on the door outside. Yu-ho, is there something wrong? Get out, Xieting Zhou turned his head and said to the door. He turned to stare at Shen Yu and whispered, they all saw me coming in to wait for you. If we don't make some noise, the whole morning's drama will be in vain. Shen Yu pinched his waist and said, you are looking for trouble. I miss you, Xieting Zhou murmured, what can I do? He leaned over and reminded her, if you don't resist, people outside will think that you agree. Ayu, you are the one who asked me to act in the drama. You have to show some attitude of falling out.